Welcome to Highly Sensitive, Happily Married, the podcast that teaches you to not only have an easier marriage as a sensitive woman, but to have one that feels more amazing by the day. Where you'll hear relatable stories, love advice that works, and coaching on how to have a marriage where feeling upset and disconnected is a thing of the past, and where instead a sense of loving connection and even fun and lightness is the norm. I'm Hannah Brooks, highly sensitive person, love expert, and marriage coach, and I'm so happy to be on this journey with you. Well, hello, my friends, and welcome to episode 209, Subtle Defensiveness Spotting. Today we are talking about something that is one of the biggest intimacy killers in marriage, and that is defensiveness. It is one of the primary backfiring tactics that we tend to fall into as human beings in our relationships, meaning its intention isn't always bad, but the results are bad when we use it. And interestingly, while of course both men and women can be defensive, it does tend to show up more often in men. And I'm going to explain why in a few minutes. The tricky part is it often goes completely unnoticed by them. But of course, not by their highly sensitive partners usually, right? It's just they don't realize that they are doing it often. And because of that, this is a really powerful episode to listen to with your spouse. Or you can listen to it first and then share with a willing partner afterwards. I really want both of you to understand how defensiveness shows up so you can start choosing communication patterns that protect respect and harmony and love instead of slowly eroding them. I also want to make sure you know that my supportive partner micro course, 5 Simple Ways to Meet Your Highly Sensitive Wife with Empathy and Love, is available now for a really short time, for like 10 days. It's a short or micro course. It's very practical and designed specifically to help partners of highly sensitive women learn how to show up in moments like this without shutting down, without getting defensive or accidentally creating distance. Ultimately, it is about learning how to show up with your wife, your sensitive wife, with empathy and love and true supportiveness so that you both can feel deeply happy in your marriage. I'll share a little bit more about it later on in the episode, but there is a link in the show notes that you can go check out if you're curious now. And you'll also find it in a pop-up window on my website, www.hspmarriagecoaching.com. I've wanted for so long to create a little course for partners of highly sensitive women, and I've finally made it for you, or really for your spouse, and ultimately your relationship. All right, so as a quick introduction to defensiveness, what I've found is that many people think defensiveness means like outright denial or even like yelling and arguing or just refusing responsibility. And that is true often. But if you're highly sensitive, you probably already know that the most damaging defensiveness usually doesn't look like that. It's not that obvious. It's not that big. Most of the time it looks calm, even polite or logical, and even well-intentioned. And that's actually what makes it so dangerous. So today we're going to talk about how defensiveness actually shows up in real marriages, especially the sneaky, subtle kind, the kind that sounds reasonable but quietly pushes us, the wife or the partner, away. And this really is especially important when you're in a relationship with a highly sensitive person, because highly sensitive people tend to spot these more subtle things and actually fixate on them. And these are things that other people might not really even notice. And so what might not be a big deal in another relationship can become quite a big deal in our relationship and can quietly and chronically erode connection and create friction. In other words, subtlety isn't all that subtle for us as HSPs. And so it needs to be addressed, this subtle defensiveness. And we're going to pull some attention to it so you can spot it in yourself or in your partner if you're not listening with your spouse. But for spouses of HSPs who are here, I'm so glad you're here. I'm so glad you're willing to take a look at this and listen and sort of see if you can see yourself in this, because it's really a gift to yourself and your relationship, of course. But it's a gift to yourself because when you have a happy wife, when you have a loving relationship, you win. You benefit deeply. So kudos to you for being here. So let's talk about defensiveness a bit in general first. So I hear about it a fair amount from my clients that their spouse gets defensive really easily. And I know this myself. If you've been listening to the podcast for a while, you know that this has been a thing. In my relationship, my husband has a tendency to fall into defensiveness pretty easily. And, he's been working on it. And actually this micro course that I just mentioned has been really helpful for him so far. And I'm seeing a lot of progress in him around this. But yeah, a lot of my clients feel it and see it too, that their spouse gets defensive quite easily. And it can lead to her not feeling like she can get through to him, or it turns little micro issues into big eruptions or conflict. It oftentimes, I've heard it explained, and I've sort of felt that myself, that it feels like when our spouse is defensive, it feels like he's batting away our feelings. So we're going to talk for a minute about why it is so damaging in intimate relationships before we get into spotting it. So for one, it makes emotional safety disappear. When someone gets defensive, the other person learns that it's not safe to be honest here. So they might start filtering or softening or just withdrawing and staying silent and not sharing their heart, not sharing what's going on for them. Well, obviously, that's an intimacy killer. Another reason is it turns connection into a debate. Instead of like, hey, we're on the same team and I care about your feelings, it becomes who's right, right? And intimacy does not survive courtroom energy, right? It's not like a courtroom. It should never be. Third reason it's damaging is it makes one person be the one to carry the emotional load alone. So when feelings are explained away or minimized, one partner ends up holding hurt and disappointment and loneliness all by themselves. And this creates quiet resentment. And I think that this is one of the biggest things that I see with my clients, my highly sensitive women, is they feel like they're carrying all of this all alone and their spouse is not there for them emotionally. And a fair amount of this comes from defensiveness. The fourth reason is that it blocks repair after mistakes. So, of course, every relationship hurts sometimes. There's mistakes made or there's transgressions that happen. But defensiveness stops healing or the repair of those mistakes by saying, I'm protecting myself instead of repairing us. And unrepaired hurt really does stack up and erode trust and connection over time. The fifth reason is that it makes love feel conditional. When someone has to be perfect to be heard, like if your wife has to use a perfect tone with you in order for you not to get defensive or reactive at her, love starts to feel like I'm safe only if I don't upset you. And that really erodes safety and trust. And I know this one because, that's been an area where my husband and I have, struggled a little and talked about and played with, which is like, I want to feel like I don't have to use a sweet, perfect tone every time I bring something up with him, right? I want to be able to show him my emotion. I want to be able to speak from what I'm actually feeling. And I want him to be able to take that in without getting reactive at me. And when he hasn't been able to do that, it does feel like I'm supposed to be perfect in order to manage his feelings for him. And I'm quite sure many women listening can relate to this, but it definitely erodes safety and trust. The sixth reason is defensiveness replaces curiosity with self-protection. So instead of wondering, what is that like for you? The focus from the defensive person's end is, how do I not look bad right now? How can I stop looking bad, right? So that shift really slowly kills emotional intimacy over time. Curiosity is really powerful in these moments, but it's not available when the focus is on self-protection and looking a certain way to your wife. The seventh reason is that it tends to just create loneliness, right? Even when you live in the same house, you can live together, you can parent together, you can sleep together, and you can still feel emotionally alone. I always say that defensiveness has always felt like a wall going up to me, like a brick wall. Like I'm gently, lovingly tossing a ball to my husband, or sometimes I'm not so gently, lovingly tossing it to him, but I'm tossing him this ball, which is my truth and my experience, and he just whacks it back at me into my face, right? What I'd love for him to do instead is to catch that ball, receive it, and hold it. Yeah? And when he can't do that, it feels lonely. We feel distant. We feel cut off from each other. So defensiveness is one of the fastest ways that loneliness happens. Again, it's like this great wall has sprouted up between you. So to put it all really simply, defensiveness doesn't protect relationships. It protects egos, which cost you intimacy. Now, the good news is that one partner's defensiveness drops, the other partner feels safer. And when an HSP woman feels safer, everything in your relationship gets so much easier and yummier. That connection, the sex, the trust, the peace, the playfulness. And the other really important and good news, and I'm going to reiterate this because it's so important to hear, is that defensiveness doesn't make you bad. It's actually usually coming from a benevolent place, ultimately, to like feel like safe and good yourself in the relationship, right? All protective strategies, coping strategies like this are well-intentioned, and they don't mean you don't care. In fact, they mean you care usually. It's just that they're not very skillful, and they tend to create the opposite of what you're wanting. You're wanting closeness and safety and to feel loved and good enough, but what you actually create is distance and discord and pain, and really neither one of you feeling loved like you want to. And that's why I call this a backfiring tactic, because it backfires. Now, as I mentioned earlier, in general, in intimate relationships, men do tend to show more overt and subtle defensiveness than women. Not because men care less, but because of how most men are socialized around emotion and failure and worth. So if you're a man or a woman who loves a man, meaning everybody listening, please know this. Most men married to the women that I work with are trying really hard to be good husbands. They care. They're loyal. They show up. Defensiveness, once again, is not about not caring. It's about caring so much that you're afraid of getting it wrong. And men were trained for this without anyone asking their permission. They were taught early on to tie their worth to getting things right. So really, boys are trained from a very early age to protect their competence. Society has taught them that they have to be capable and not mess up and not be weak and not to need too much. And even if their family was the most amazing family, some of this still seeps in because a family isn't a world unto itself, right? We're not isolated from the rest of the world. So it slowly creeps in. It's so interesting to see this in my own boys. Is like, certainly I never taught them any of that. In fact, I tried to teach them the opposite. But these lessons seeped in because our society is still saturated in this way of thinking. So what happens because of this is that their sense of worth becomes tied to doing things right. And when they don't do things, quote unquote, right, they feel like failures. So when their wife is hurting and their wife says, that hurt me, or I felt alone, or I needed you to do XYZ and you didn't, it often lands for them as I failed, or I didn't do my job, or that she's saying that. That's not usually what you're saying, right? You're very rarely ever saying, when you're saying, oh, that hurt me, you're not saying you're a failure, right? But that's what he makes it mean because of his conditioning. And then their nervous system and their lizard brain moves into protection or survival mode, as our nervous systems and brains tend to do when we feel like that. So then they start explaining or justifying or trying to look reasonable. So I want you to be clear, this isn't a character flaw unique to your partner or unique to you if you're a partner of an HSP woman who's listening. It's conditioning, and it is not your fault. And the really interesting thing here is this conditioning, this I need to get it right kind of thing, it actually kind of works at school or in sports or when you're at work. I mean, it's not ideal ever, but it's less problematic in those areas, but it really doesn't work in an intimate relationship. Another reason why this is more common for men is because men are less practiced at quote unquote failing well in relationships. Because again, many men grew up learning not to screw up, that they have to get it right, that they have to fix things. And they did not get the message and the truth that you can mess up and still be loved. So when they hurt their partner or their partner is hurting because of something they did, their nervous system panics, right? So defensiveness is a fight or flight or emergency response in their nervous system. It's a behavior that comes out of that. And interestingly, research also consistently shows that in heterosexual couples, men's nervous systems often go into that threat state faster than women's in conflict. Men's heart rate and stress response spike faster in conflict, and they hit overwhelm sooner, and they shut down or defend earlier. And so even calm feedback from a wife can feel intense to them internally. So I don't know what the research says about how men compare to highly sensitive wives in these cases, but it is interesting to know that research. Another reason why women might not tend towards defensiveness as much as men is because women are usually socialized and trained in emotional processing earlier. So in general, girls are encouraged to talk about feelings and name emotions and repair friendships and apologize relationally. And of course, our brains are more wired in this direction from birth anyway. So we have that advantage and we have more practice. And so by adulthood, women are better generally at sitting in emotional discomfort without immediately self-protecting. Not all women, but many. And sometimes with highly sensitive people, this is not exactly true. We actually have more practice, but we have more emotion than the non-highly sensitive person. So, it can be that much harder to sit with that emotional discomfort if you haven't learned and really practiced deep skills around this. But obviously, it just makes sense that men tend to be more defensive than women. And to be clear, this was something that protected you as a man. As you developed, as you grew, it helped you survive criticism and pressure and expectations in the past. It just doesn't work well in intimate relationships. So understand that being defensive, again, does not mean you're selfish or even immature or unsafe as a human being. It means your nervous system is trying to protect you and your conditioning isn't helping you show up in the way that most women feel most safe and loved with. And actually, under defensiveness is almost always one main fear, which is, what if I'm not enough for her? So defensiveness is actually often a sign that you really do care, that you want to be enough and do well enough by your partner. But of course, there are better ways to show it than falling into defensiveness. And learning those better ways starts with seeing where and how you or your partner are being defensive. Interestingly, most men have no idea they're doing some of the more subtle forms of defensiveness, not because they're clueless, but because it just happens so automatically and maybe even feels like it's reasonable. So let's get to doing some defensiveness spotting, shall we? So first, I'm going to share the classic, obvious ways defensiveness shows up. These are the kinds of defensiveness that are pretty hard to miss or to label as anything other than defensiveness. So listen in to see if you do these or noting if maybe your partner does. When you can spot your own defensiveness or your partner's, then instead of creating walls between you and eroding trust and security between you, you have the best chance of shifting it to ways of communicating that deepen connection and trust and love. So really be willing to see yourself in these. So the first obvious way defensiveness shows up is just denial and pushback, right? So he might say something like, well, that's not what happened, or I didn't do that, or you're remembering it wrong, right? So what's happening here is he's protecting himself from blame. And what she feels is, my reality isn't safe here. I mean, this one's kind of gaslighting, right? So yeah, this one's a big no-no. The second obvious way is what we might call blame shifting or turning it back to her. And what that might look like is him saying, well, you do the same thing, or, well, what about when you XYZ, or you're not exactly innocent here. Yeah. So what's happening here is he's escaping discomfort by making her the problem. And what she's going to feel is, I get punished for speaking up. Really not fun. The third obvious way is just minimizing. And he might say something like, oh, it's not a big deal. You're overreacting. Or this isn't worth fighting about. And so what's happening from his end is he's trying to make the emotion go away. And what she feels is, my feelings are too much for you. And I think this is another one that happens more often with highly sensitive people, partners of highly sensitive people who don't understand sensitivity. This was one motivation for me making the micro course, because I really explain sensitivity. So people stop saying things like, oh, you're overreacting, it's not a big deal. Another big way obvious defensiveness shows up is shutdown or withdrawal. This might be a little bit more subtle because it's not as blatant and loud, but what it looks like from his end is going quiet or leaving the room, or just saying, I don't want to talk about this. So it's avoidance, right? But it's also a defensive strategy. And this is usually overwhelm, not indifference, but it's still defensive. And what she tends to feel is, I'm alone with this. So those are the more obvious ways that it shows up, and most men can recognize those. But the defensiveness that does the most damage is quieter and more subtle, and often comes from good intentions. Like, some of those ones are less obvious good intentions. They're a little bit more blatantly dismissive, but these subtle ones really tend to come from this benevolent place in a bigger way. Again, this is why they're so sneaky in some ways, is they feel like they're well-intentioned, at least from his end. So we're going to call this next list a list of subtle defensiveness, or the reasonable explanation reflex, because that's oftentimes what it's like. All right, it's defensiveness that might sound mature or fair, or sounds calm, and might even sound cooperative. But emotionally, what it does is it redirects the moment away from her experience and back to himself, and protecting his self or his character, his sense of being a good human being, i.e. his ego. And that's really where it does damage, because it redirects the moment away from her experience and back to him. So listen closely and try to spot your own patterns with this. And please also note that in the Supportive Partner Micro Course, there's a whole lesson dedicated to shifting defensiveness, and a very clear and thorough checklist to really see your own subtle defensiveness patterns. It's a bigger list than what I'm going to share here. There's more than what I'm just going to share here. So this, of course, is going to make it way easier to start building the simple skills it takes to communicate in ways that build real connection and support and trust, instead of continuing to fall into these intimacy eroding defensive patterns. So first from the list of subtle defensiveness is explaining the timeline. So in this one, she says something like, I'm upset because you're 30 minutes late and it got really hectic for me trying to deal with the kids and make dinner. And he says, here's what happened. Or, first, I was already behind and then this came up. Now, this might feel reasonable to him because he's offering context, right? That feels reasonable. But it lands poorly because each step he explains is like arguing for it making sense that he did what he did. But what she feels is, you're building a case for why I shouldn't feel what I feel. The next subtle defensiveness tactic is explaining his capacity. So that might look like him saying, well, I was exhausted, or I didn't have the bandwidth, or I was overwhelmed. What's happening here is he's answering why it was hard for him instead of addressing how it felt for her. And it's defensive because it answers a question that she didn't ask, which was, why wasn't this possible? If she had wanted the answer to that question, she would have asked that question. But most likely, she was just trying to share that she was upset or hurt. And by focusing on his capacity, what she hears is that his limits matter more than her experience. The truth is, both can matter. But her experience was the thing that was brought up, and it's the first thing that should be focused on. The next form of subtle defensiveness is leading with intentions. So again, she brings something up that she doesn't feel good about, and he says, well, I didn't mean it that way, or that wasn't my intention, or I was just trying to help. And men do this, of course, because he hopes that his intent will protect his character. He wants his intention to be what mattered, not the result or the impact of his action. In other words, he wants to show that his intention was good, so he's still a good person. And this is defensive because it's about protecting himself, not hearing her or caring about her experience. And so she feels like he's telling her she shouldn't have those feelings and that his good intention is more important than her feelings. The next form of subtle defensiveness is logic over empathy. So he might say, that didn't make sense logically, or it just made sense to do it this way, or the most practical option was for me to blah, blah, blah. So again, this is explaining the logic behind it, using logic instead of empathy. And this feels neutral to him because logic seems safe and objective, but it wounds because, again, logic replaces empathy. And here's a big hint, empathy is what's really called for here, at least as a first response. And I'm not saying that logic or explaining yourself never has a place. Usually that's welcome once empathy has happened. So empathy has got to come first if you want your relationship to be a loving, intimate, deeply safe one. When logic comes first, what she feels is my feelings aren't part of your decision making. My feelings don't really factor in. My feelings don't matter. But double hint, your highly sensitive wife's feelings really matter. Not because they're correct, but because she feels them so much. So they need to be taken into account. They need to be met with kindness. All right, the next subtle form of defensiveness is the apology and explanation combination. So that might sound like him saying, I'm sorry, I was just stressed, or I shouldn't have said that, but follow that up with any of the other forms of subtle defensiveness. And what really is happening is that explanation competes with the apology and it kind of cancels it out. And it's defensive because it's not a full apology. It's not a real apology. It's still justifying and about defending his goodness. So what she feels is that, he's apologizing without really landing here with her, without really being present to what she feels. And the last subtle form of defensiveness that I'm going to share today is excessive detail, sharing excessive detail. So what it'll sound like from his end is he'll give a play-by-play, or he'll add more and more context, not just about the timeline, but like all his thought processing and reasoning or whatever, right? He just keeps talking about it past the emotional moment. And this happens because he thinks that details are going to soften the problem. My husband does this one a lot, so that he can avoid responsibility. In other words, he thinks that more detail equals more insulation from blame and more of a sense of like, oh, I am a good person. I am a good person. See, this is why and why and why, and explain. See, I'm good in this case. I'm capable and well-intentioned. But this is defensiveness because it's like, once again, it's about protecting his ego. And in this case, with reasonable explanations. And it's not about presence with her feelings. And when she comes to you upset about something, she wants your presence with her feelings. She wants that empathy. So her experience is really just, you're talking around my pain. You're talking and talking around this pain. And here I am, once again, with my pain by myself. And so to really summarize kind of in all of these reasonable explanation reflex moments, there is one major sort of emotional mismatch going on. It's that he thinks if she understands why, she'll feel better about me. She'll see that I'm good and I did well, I'm trying, and I'm a good person. On the other hand, she experiences, if he cares about how I feel, he'll stay here with me in this emotional space. But here's the thing. Explaining, like all of these different forms of subtle defensiveness do, it's kind of saying like, wait, you've got to understand why I'm not bad in this situation. Whereas being present with her feelings says to her, you matter to me. In other words, explaining moves away from her inner world and back into his inner world. And the medicine in these moments when she is upset about something is moving into her world with care. So one really helpful thing to keep in mind here is if your attention shifts from her feelings to your image, defensiveness is starting to happen. And it's a signal to turn back to her feelings with love. So I hope that list of subtle defensiveness was helpful to hear and to start to get a sense of how defensiveness can show up and really make a moment that was an opportunity for intimacy, love, trust building, deep connection, turn into one that's very divided and unsafe and painful. And before we wrap up, I want to leave you with this. It's just a reminder that defensiveness is almost never about being unkind or not caring. Ultimately, it's usually about fear of not being seen as good, about wanting to feel like you are still good and still lovable and still enough for your wife or to your wife. It's really about protecting your identity as a good partner, even when that protection accidentally creates distance. So if you've noticed yourself in these examples, if you thought, oh no, I do that, I don't want you to feel ashamed. It's in fact really powerful that you're able to admit that to yourself. That awareness is actually the first real skill. It's already a big step forward because seeing and owning is where change begins. So learning to spot defensiveness in yourself in real time is huge. And learning what to do instead and how to stay open and curious and connected when things feel uncomfortable, that's the next level of intimacy. And that's where relationships start to really feel safer and easier and more loving and truly like home. So we go deeper into how to interrupt this in real time and actually create safety and meet your partner with things that feel beautiful and connecting to her in my new short course for partners of highly sensitive women. And again, that's called the Supportive Partner Micro Course, 5 simple ways to meet your highly sensitive wife with empathy and love. So for the partner of an HSP woman who'd like support with that next level, and if you want practical tools to help you spot these moments and stay present with your wife so you can both feel more connected and more secure and more on the same team, this micro course walks you through exactly how to do that. And to be clear, this work isn't about being perfect. It's about learning how to stay connected even when you're imperfect. And you're going to learn how to respond in ways that help your sensitive partner feel safe and loved, especially in the moments like the ones we talked about today, but also just in general across the board in your relationship. And this course is only available for a limited time. This is a really special opportunity. It's available until February 24th for $67. And you can learn more about it through the link in the show notes, or you can go to hspmarriagecoaching.com and a pop-up is going to come up on the home page. You can click that and you'll be able to learn all about the special opportunity. I created this because I don't want highly sensitive women to have to be alone in making their marriages feel more loving and safe and connected. And I don't want men to feel like they have to figure it out on their own, because that takes a whole lot of extra time and energy and trial and error. And your relationship is worth investing the little bit of time and money it takes to build these simple, powerful tools and skills. So come check it out and get access. And lastly, for the women listening, you can, of course, invite him to take this course. Go to the description page for the course, and at the bottom, if you scroll all the way down to the bottom, there's some help on exactly how to share this with him, how to invite him to do this. And there's even a special share page link to share and invite him to take this course in a really loving way. I really wanted to make this easy for you. On top of that, your role to put an end to the damage defensiveness can do in a relationship is, for one, to learn to see your partner's defensiveness as him wanting to show you that he meant well, that his intentions, in other words, were in the right place. So reframing it that way, that he wants you to know he meant well or he didn't mean harm, that is a reframe that you can practice and can really help the whole issue when your partner does start to go into the subtle defensiveness mode. And there's a lot more that you can do from your end of the street to support this shift in your partner and also in yourself. So absolutely go listen to my original defensiveness podcast that was called When Your Spouse is Defensive, and that's episode 126. That's a good one for you as a woman to listen to, or anyone whose spouse is defensive, because there's a lot there that you can do from your end to avoid or end this pattern of falling into defensiveness. All right, everyone, I hope this was really helpful. I'm really glad you took the time to listen, and be oh so well.